In the words of Alfred Hitchcock, who started almost every show this way, good evening. Okay, normally I would be saying good morning, church, or good afternoon, church, but, well, let's just say I was working on a project today and time got away from me and, well, it's evening when I'm recording this. I guess you'll get to see it tomorrow morning when it's released, but it's still a midweek greeting, and it's great to be with you in this way, church. As I've been working today, I've been thinking about a word, discipleship. A word that we talked about on Sunday in the message as we took a look at the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit, and lo, I'm with you always. You know, when we think about discipleship, and we think about sharing the gospel with others, we as a church do pretty well at emphasizing that, I think. And we've talked about this in the past, how we've got many people that have gone out from this church to be involved in ministry. And we've got many people who are part of this church currently that are involved in ministry and that are sharing God's love with people in many different ways. But as I was thinking about this idea of being faithful disciples and of sharing God's love, I was reminded of something as I read this week. Not in a passage from the New Testament, as one might think if I'm thinking about discipleship and what it means to share God's love with others, but rather from the Old Testament. It's a couple of verses from the book of Ezekiel, words of prophecy that were shared by God through the prophet Ezekiel to the city of Jerusalem, talking about their impending judgment because they had wandered away from God. And we read these words in Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 12. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply and send famine upon it and kill its people and their animals, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would save only themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. Or if I send wild beasts through that country, and they leave it childless, and it becomes desolate so that no one can pass through it because of the beasts, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if these three men were in it, they could not save their own sons or daughters. They alone would be saved, but the land would be desolate. Did you recognize the names of those three men? Noah, as in, and the ark, the one that God used to save all of humanity, the one who he alone was faithful to God. Daniel, the guy who, when given the opportunity and the command actually to bow down and do things that did not honor God, refused to do so, and his punishment was getting thrown in a lion's den, and yet God was with him in the lion's den and saved him. Definitely godly men. Or Job. We've talked a lot about Job last year when we preached through Job and took a look at what it means to live a life in the midst of suffering and how God worked in Job's life. And what do we see throughout the book of Job? He refused to dishonor God. Even though his wife was the one who said, why don't you just, reject God and, curse God and be done with this suffering? He's like, no. I don't like this. This is tough, but I will not curse God. Three men who were incredibly devoted to God. And what does this verse say? Even if those three men were in that country where God's judgment was happening, they would only be able to save themselves. Nobody else would be saved because of their righteousness. They would only save themselves, not even their sons or daughters. It is an incredible privilege that God chooses to use us to share his love with others. It's an incredible responsibility. It's an honor. It's a joy. And yet, we need to keep in mind that it's not my job to make someone else a Christian. No matter how good our outreach programs are, no matter how effective we are at communicating with our neighbors and our friends, no matter how many different ways, excuse me, we may use acts of kindness to show God's love, being God's hands and feet. Those are all important things, and we are called to do all of those things. But it's not my job to make someone become a Christian. My job as a disciple is to love them as Jesus would love them. But the response, that's between them and God. And sometimes we can become discouraged. We can look at an individual that we have just loved and loved and loved and loved and loved and say, why aren't they becoming a Christian? And we can begin to feel guilty about that, or perhaps we can become disillusioned and think, well, maybe we should just quit trying. Our calling is to go and make disciples, which means loving people and sharing God's love in words and in deed, in what we say and in what we do. But it's not our responsibility to make the nations come to Jesus. We are to go to the nations and share his love. But it's between the Holy Spirit and each individual as to what their response will be. I find that freeing. I find that freeing because it puts the responsibility in the proper place. And there are times the enemy may want me to feel guilty about the fact that somebody else is not becoming a Christian. That's not God placing that guilt on me. As long as I am faithfully loving them the way that he wants them to and sharing the gospel in the way that he wants them to do, as long as I am faithful in going and making disciples of people and sharing his love, the responsibility of the response is up to the work that God's Spirit is doing in their lives. And so I want to encourage us today. Yes, let's have a heart for the nations. Yes, let's be focusing on sharing God's love. And let's be loving our neighbors as ourselves. But let's not be taking on a burden that is not ours to carry. You are not responsible to make someone else come to know Christ. You are responsible to love them as Christ would love them. And so may we be faithful in our responsibility of loving as God has called us to. May we be praying that God's Spirit would be working through what we do and working in their hearts and minds, and that they would soften their hearts to them. But may we also be releasing them to God and trusting that they will choose to respond. I don't know if this resonates with you, but to me, it just seemed like a significant reminder this week. And so maybe someone else needs a significant reminder. Let's go and be the church God has called us to be, embracing and revealing God's love to others. But let's also be trusting God that he will be the one that will be working through us, and that he will be drawing others to him, and that people will respond. It's not me who does it. It's not you who does it. It's God who does it. May his church be built. Have a great week, church. Oh, just a reminder, this Sunday is the beginning of our missions week with Jacqueline, and so she'll be speaking on Sunday morning, and also we'll be having a sharing time in the evening, 7 o'clock, at the church if you'd like to hear more about the ministry that she's involved in, and in terms of with Woven. You also will be able to hear how you can be involved. A couple other things that will be happening throughout the week following. She'll be meeting with some of our Bible study groups that have started up. She's also open to meeting with individuals or in families. If you would like to get together with Jacqueline, contact the church office. Bev is scheduling appointments for her and when she'll be available. Also, there'll be an opportunity to do some pre-Christmas shopping, some early Christmas shopping. Jacqueline will be bringing some jewelry and bags with her made by the ladies overseas, which they sell, and all the money, the proceeds go back into the ministry. And so it's a way of supporting the ministry, but also perhaps getting some early Christmas shopping done. Details about when that will be happening and available will be in the midweek bulletin. And if you don't have access to that, you can always contact the church office to find out the information as well. But that will be happening during the week following, like next week. So Sunday morning service, Sunday evening sharing time, and then throughout the week, Jacqueline's available and the pop-up store will be happening. And so keep that in mind. Anyways, I think that's all I had to say this week. Of course, I already forgot to record the greeting, so I may be forgetting something, but if I do, we'll get it another time. Have a great week, church. Let's be the church God has called us to be.